welcome. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today to talk about our webinar about our emergency ballast water requirements that are effective as of last week. So my name is Chris Ciani. I'm the Environmental Program Manager for the Marine Invasive Species Program here. And I'm going to hand off to Jonathan Thompson, a Senior Environmental Scientist with our program. Jonathan's going to be giving the webinar. And Jonathan led the adoption and the development of our emergency rule, and he's working on the adoption and development of the permanent rule that will replace this after it expires. And he'll talk about that during the webinar. So Jonathan, if you don't mind sharing your screen and taking over. Oh, you're also muted.
Yep. I wanted to say hello and thank you. Thank you, Chris. But hello, turn my camera on for a minute before I turn it off while I'm giving the presentation, because I'm be looking at a different screen while I'm presenting. I hope everyone's doing well this morning. And I'm going to be talking to you, as Chris said, about California's emergency ballast water regulations that are effective or became effective on June 18th of 2025. And again, as Chris mentioned, my name is Jonathan Thompson. I'm a Senior Environmental Scientist with the California State Lands Commission's Marine Invasive Species Program. Okay, so a little bit of background. The Commission implements ballast water discharge performance standards to limit the concentration of living organisms in that are discharged into California waters. There's no change to these standards. They were adopted and implemented in 2022, and they are equal to the U.S. federal standards implemented currently by the Coast Guard and the U.S. Coast Guard, and the U.S. EPA. Here is the table of the different size classes and the indicator species, and then the allowable concentration for these organisms in the different size classes. This is something that most of you are all probably familiar with, but we just wanted to put this back up there as a reference for folks to remember, or as a reminder about the actual concentrations. And if you want more information about that, we have more information on our website. So more background information. The golden mussel was discovered in California at the port of Stockton in October of 2024. It was detected in environmental DNA water samples that were analyzed as far back as spring of 2023, and those samples were from the Clifton Court Forebay, and they were analyzed by California Department of Water Resources. This species, this is the first time that the golden mussel have been discovered in North America. So it's the first introduction into North America, and this introduction was likely a result of a ballast water introduction. And this species poses a significant immediate threat to the ecological health of the California Delta, California's water infrastructure, and California's fresh and brackish water environments. So as a result of this introduction, it exposed or highlighted a gap in management for fresh and brackish ballast water that's discharged into California's fresh and brackish water environments. This was potentially a result of the transition from exchange to the implementation of performance standards. That was likely because there was a higher concentration of fresh and brackish water organisms that weren't exchanged mid-ocean, and therefore it led to a greater likelihood of aquatic invasive species introductions. So the emergency rule aims to decrease the likelihood of these introductions. So moving on to what the emergency rule is all about. So first off, I want to talk about which vessels that this emergency rule applies to. So the emergency rule only applies if all three conditions on this list are true. So number one, a vessel has to arrive at one of California's fresh or brackish water ports. So that includes Sacramento, Stockton, or any other ports in the San Francisco Bay Area east of and including the Port of Rodeo. We have a map on the next slide, but there's a couple of other conditions that I want to go over first. One of the other conditions is that vessels have to be discharging ballast water. And then finally, that discharged ballast water needed to be sourced from waters with a salinity of 18 parts per thousand or with the salinity less than 18 parts per thousand. Okay, so a little bit more on the geography here. So the Port of Sacramento is right here. The Port of Stockton is right here. And you can see that those are definitely freshwater ports. And then the more brackish water ports are in this sort of the Carquinez port area. And I'll list off those ports that are included. So I mentioned the Port of Rodeo, so inside the San Francisco area, and then from the Port of Rodeo east. So we got Rodeo, Selby, Vallejo, Crockett, Benicia, Martinez, Pittsburgh, and Antioch. So the emergency rule is estimated to impact 24 vessel arrivals per year. And this is for vessels where all of those conditions would apply. And this is based on, this estimate's based on an average of arrivals from 2021 through 2024. And then we also wanted to put up a range of the annual arrivals for some of the vessel types that we saw, or actually this is the vessel types that we saw, those ports. So for ATBs, in some years we saw 0, and then we saw as high as 13. For bulkers, it was between 7 and 13. For tank vessels, it was between 3 and 8. And for general cargo vessels, it was between 0 and 2 vessel arrivals. So what does this emergency rule require? Now that we've figured out which vessels that this applies to, now those vessels and the crews operating them need to know what they'll need to do. So vessels subject to the emergency rule must meet existing ballast water discharge performance standards, and there's no change to that. And that's if vessels are subject to those performance standards. The vessels must conduct a ballast water exchange at least 50 nautical miles from land. So very similar to the exchange requirements that were in place before the discharge standards. And then they must ensure that the discharged ballast water is at or above a salinity of 30 parts per thousand. And that's roughly ocean salinity. So a little bit more information about the emergency rule making. The emergency rule is effective June 18th, 2025. The emergency regulations will be effective for 180 days with up to 2 90-day extensions. And during that time, the Marine Invasive Species Program will be preparing for a regular public rulemaking action, which will include a full 45-day public comment period. So with that, we will take questions.
I'll ask a question. It's Brian Dixon with Polar Tankers.
Yes.
So if we came in empty and say we were at Martinez and loaded water, would we be able to discharge that water that we loaded in the same area? I know it's within a mile.
Chris, are you on? Would you mind taking that one?
Sure. Yeah, so the provisions under our previous regulations in Article 4.6 allow for uptake and discharge in the same location. And so that still remains, that's the same location. That's for the state rules. I would suggest that you talk with the Coast Guard about what their rules would require.
Sure. Cool. Appreciate it. Thank you all.
No problem.
Thanks, Chris.
Hey, hi, Chris and Jonathan. This is Kuldeep Singh with Gallagher GMS, Gallagher Marine Systems.
Hi, Kuldeep.
Thanks for putting this presentation together. I have 3 questions. Is this presentation available to the public? That's the first one.
Yes.
It's available on your web.
Yeah, we'll send out a link to the participants, and then we'll also post a link on our website.
Great. Okay. My second question is, if I missed the initial part of your presentation, I was engaged with something else. If it's going to be effective from June 18th, how is this information going to be promulgated to all the users? Or all the users of this regulation? That's my point. Or affected by this regulation?
So I'll try to take this, Chris, and then if I miss something, please feel free to add in. One of our approaches to getting the information out about this emergency rule is webinars such as this. We also are preparing an info sheet and meeting with our statewide inspectors today, ones that go on board the vessel, so that they know about the emergency rule and can pass that information along to the crews while they're on board. And then I believe we'll also be sending out a notice too for folks that have signed up on our distribution lists. And then it'll be available on our website. Chris, is there any other venues that I missed?
That's primarily it. Yeah, it's a kind of a broader outreach strategy, and this is one component, and the message, the email that goes out will be a part of that as well. And as Jonathan mentioned, our inspectors have those conversations with the crews on board. And part of our effort here with this webinar is to share this information with you all, and for you all to take this information and share it with your clients or your fleets, so we get as big an umbrella as we can to get this information out.
Right, thanks. And my third question is this: 30 parts per thousand can be measured using hydrometer, can be measured with the salinometer. Are there any guidelines on how the ship's crew should determine 30 parts per thousand?
Well, we will have guidance for our inspectors who will likely be using refractometers, or our team when we go out and inspect and sample. But we know that crews will use the tools that are available to them that they're already using to determine salinity of the water that's in their tanks. And in some cases, that's the ballast water treatment system that provides that information. So that's information that we would love to hear from you all too, about the different tools that are available on board vessels for the crews to take this information and measure it. And it's something that we want to make sure that our inspectors are fully aware of.
So, Chris, we did study this subject in some detail. The pertinent part of that data for 30 parts per thousand is the temperature of the seawater, because the temperature of the seawater will start affecting the salinity too. So maybe a simple guidance document, if you feel that it's not for you to do so, but somebody should address this matter so that there is a uniform kind of procedure available to seafarers to use to determine what salinity it is. They may determine salinity which may not match the salinity determined by your inspectors.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, and definitely the interplay between the density of the water and the salinity of the water is influenced by the temperature. So we will have some internal discussions about that, and maybe we'll reach out to you.
Great, and that's all. I exhausted all my questions for today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Philippe.
Thanks.
Hi, it's Tom Lillig. Let me turn on my camera. I may have missed it, but are you sharing this information with the Coast Guard so that, you know, if the vessels come in, that the Coast Guard can share that info before, you know, maybe anybody else?
Yeah, I will note that there are Coast Guard members joining us today, at least at the headquarters level. We will do outreach at the local level here at the sector San Francisco to make sure that they're aware.
All right, thank you.
And if I may just interject with another question.
Sure.
This emergency rule is obviously because the waters affected are sensitive, and you require additional exchange to have minimum of 30 parts per thousand of salinity for those waters, ensuring that there is no kind of invasive species being introduced there. Is this going to extend to other locations in California, or is it for the time being? Is there any study ongoing that would make this more universal in the state of California?
Well, California's fresh and brackish water ports are the ones that are included in this emergency rule, and the rest of the ports in California are outside of that brackish water for the most part. So we aren't anticipating bringing this into any other ports. One thing we will say that we didn't mention earlier is this rule is also aligned with the EPA's final VITA, Vessel Incidental Discharge Act rule for the Pacific region for ports that are under 18 parts per thousand. So in doing this, we're aligning with the requirement that will be in effect at the federal level once VITA is fully implemented.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, there are already existing states along the Pacific coast that have similar requirements.
Yes.
Thanks, Chris.
Correct, yeah. Oregon has a similar rule, yep. Okay, well, if there are no questions, Jonathan, would you mind putting your email address back up for a quick second in case anyone wants to jot it down. If you have any questions over the coming days or weeks, please reach out to us and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Yep, there it is in the chat. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you, Chris. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you, Chris and Jonathan. Thanks.
Appreciate it, guys.